Nobody could vote because they would put up all kind of hindrances.
This courthouse does not belong to Sheriff Clark. This courthouse belongs to the people of Dallas County.
You came down to make a mockery out of this courthouse.
If you were white, you were right. If you were black, you get back.
I don't think we went too far arresting them. We didn't beat them. We didn't hurt them.
I became a freedom fighter that day.
I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church.
My heart was beating faster and faster because I knew something was going to happen.
I am so scared. I mean, because the violence was in the air.
But I remember most of the screams.
Coming down on the heads of women and children and splitting them like watermelons.
I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. I thought I was going to die.
And we shall overcome.
Now we have this possibility of the right to participate in the political process.
There's always been an organized attempt to turn the clock back.
Selma have changed not just America, but the world.
Selma, Alabama was like so many towns in the racially segregated South. But for a few months in 1965, it became the epicenter for a movement that forced the nation to look at itself, its prejudices, racial divides, inequalities, and its brutality. In so many ways, Selma was the perfect place for a march to remember. Selma's Queen of Peace Catholic Church was created in 1970 with the merger two churches, one all black, the other all white.
I'm very proud of being the pastor right now of one of the only integrated churches in Dallas County.
Father Richard Mahalik is an Edmondite, a Catholic order that came to Selma in the 1930s to serve its African American population.
And it was at a time in which obviously segregation was strong.
Color was considered to be the badge of how you would be treated. If you were white, you were right. If you were black, you get back.
I, as a child, saw, even from my own house, the fear that my parents had.
It's hard to describe because it was the norm for me. I didn't know anything else.
Feeling the disrespect that they had to face every day.
And our parents sort of kept us sheltered from the bad stuff. If we needed shoes, they'd measure our feet with string and then go downtown and bring us back the shoes. You didn't always like what they brought back, but you had shoes.
I used to see the for colored signs only, the for white signs only, and I used to ask questions about it. And many times my parents didn't even want to respond to my questions.
As far as economic condition, we had outdoor bathrooms, and we were very poor. Life was a struggle.
Henry Allen was in high school. Joanne Bland was 11 years old.
And I wanted to sit at that lunch counter, but my grandmother said I couldn't because I was colored. And one day my grandmother was talking to one of her friends in front of the store. And she noticed me looking in the window, and she leaned over and she said, "When we get our freedom, you can do that too." And she pointed at the counter. I became a freedom fighter that day.
It had been a decade since the Supreme Court integrated schools, 5 years since lunch counter sit-ins, 4 years since freedom riders came to Alabama and Mississippi on interstate buses, and only months since Freedom Summer in Mississippi and the slaying of 3 civil rights workers in nearby Neshoba County. Now the glacial pace of civil rights turned to voting rights.
Nobody could vote because they would put up all kind of hindrances. If you pass one, they'd come up with another one. You'd have to answer questions about anything to keep you, and then they tell you you failed.
Before 1965, in Selma and Dallas County, less than 2% of blacks, only 240, could vote. In neighboring Lowndes County, where the black population was 5,000, not one was registered to vote.
How many amendments are there to the Alabama Constitution? You know, after this November, there's 861. That's a lot of material. What's amendment number 275 of the Alabama Constitution?
And then you wait in line to go into to see the person who was doing the registry. And sometimes you will wait in line for several hours. And if you got in to see the registrar, they might tell you that you're the last person to come in and you only had a few minutes because the registrar had to go home.
Then you go back to work and you find out you're fired.
And in a strange sense, in a strange way, Selma selected herself. Black men and women stood in unmovable line, sometime all day. There were black school teachers in this city were told they could not read or write well enough, that they failed the so-called literacy test.
Georgia Congressman John Lewis was among the early organizers with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, called SNCC. The group joined voter registration efforts already underway in Selma.
Well, when I first went to Selma, Alabama, there was an X on the map for Selma. In other words, 2 other teams of SNCC workers had gone down to Selma and had come back with the report that nothing could be done in Selma because it was too dangerous and white people were too mean, black folks were too afraid.
But we had a long line of persons. When one was denied, the other stepped up until the voting rights registration time ended. And so that particular day, and we came back the next time to pursue this whole questions of people having the right to vote regardless of the color of their skin.
Standing in the way of blacks who wanted to register to vote was Dallas County Sheriff Jim Clark, who bullied and beat demonstrators on the courthouse steps.
He's carrying out the orders of the white community to keep minorities, blacks, from becoming registered.
This man was very cruel. He was vicious. He wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side, and he carried an electric cap router in his hand. He didn't use it on cows. He wore a button on his left lapel that said never.
This courthouse does not belong to Sheriff Clark. This courthouse belongs to the people of Dallas County, and these are the people of Dallas County, and they have come to register.
The key to the whole movement was student nonviolence. He meant they slapped you on the right cheek, you turned the left cheek. And so when they recruited me, then I went out and started recruiting. So we recruited this whole entire school from the 12th grade through the 7th grade.
We came down to make a mockery out of this courthouse, and we're not going to have it.
Students and their teachers staged calm and dignified demonstrations.
The teachers were most of the middle class. They were utterly dependent on white school officials for their jobs. Mostly older people, all dressed up, walking very quietly down the sidewalk, not getting in the way of anything. They went to the courthouse. Clark manhandled them on the steps of the courthouse, didn't arrest anybody, but then they turned, okay, you're not letting us in, we're keeping our dignity. Reese turned around and they walked back. I'm in the church when they start coming in.
Well, I get punched with his billy club and so forth, but there again we were determined that we were not going to allow billy clubs and anything else to stop us from pursuing the rights that we felt that all persons had, the right to participate in the political process.
People were crying. This was some kind of breakthrough. I'm talking grizzled, hardened veteran civil rights workers as well as students. Oh my gosh, these folks have broken their chains enough to actually go out and do this. They are real live role models for us today, and we needed it so bad.
It was dangerous work, even for high school students like Henry Allen, who was attacked with friends as he walked home from a church mass meeting.
When I got middle way, there were 3 state troops horseback, hiding between the buildings. They ran everybody off the porches. They ran everybody in the house. They beat people in the community. I started running down the sidewalk, and only God, no way I could outrun 3 horses. They had the cow prowl in one hand. They were swinging at me with the billy club in the other hand. And one elderly lady to my left took to her feet and opened her door. I was running so fast like a diving boat. I dove through her door with both my hands, and I came this close today of being killed. And then my mind started to really think, then focus in there. I laid on the floor crying. I said, Lord, what must I do? Should I quit or should I continue? Because I lived a mile away from there. I had to go back through another day to even get home. And so my mind said, okay, not gonna quit.
The marches to the courthouse continued. Adults and children were arrested and jailed, including 14-year-old Linda Blackman Lowry.
But even if we weren't friends, if we came from different schools, it was like this Three Musketeers atmosphere, one for all and all for one, because we were all scared. If one cried, somebody else would cry too. You know, if one starts singing, we'd all start singing.
Swing low, sweet chariot.
It was just, we had each other's back.
My mother had to go down to the courthouse to visit Judge Bernard Rim. Mother came in, I was standing beside her. He said, today I'm gonna let your nigger children out of jail. And I better not ever catch these children over the Brown Chapel Church marching again. Oh, my mother done with tears in her eyes, and she was saying, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. I was inside, I was angry. I was a teenager, but I knew that anything I said or done was wrong.
40 years later, while he was living in a nursing home, former Sheriff Jim Clark was asked about the arrest.
A lot of times we had to do what we had to do. You talk about school kids, for instance. I don't think we went too far arresting them. We didn't beat them. We didn't hurt them.
After having gone through many difficulties prior to that time, SNCC was in here, we decided that we would invite Dr. King. And so I signed the official invitation, inviting Dr. King and the members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to come here to Selma.
I was tired. I'd been through, Albany, Birmingham, St. Augustine, Savannah, and the March on Washington, and I was ready to, cool it for the winter.
Andrew Young, former Atlanta mayor and UN ambassador, was a close advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They were coming off 2 hectic years.
I have a dream.
With the 1963 March on Washington, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and now voter rights, and Selma became their focus.
Fireworks started almost immediately. We went to try to check in a hotel, and while they were trying to check in the hotel, this guy came up and tapped Martin on the shoulder, and nobody paid any attention to him. He said, bam! And Martin, he hit him pretty hard. And he rubbed his head. He said, no, he said, don't bother him. He said, you have a problem with me, sir? Can I help you? And everybody wanted to tear him to pieces. He said, no, please, let's hear what he has to say. And by that time, Wilson Baker, who was the chief of police, had come up and taken him away.
Believe it or not, there was an injunction against public gatherings of more than 3 people in Selma. And so when Dr. King came that morning, January 2nd, 1965, they were driving into a situation where they were going to be challenging an existing injunction.
When Dr. King came and when Dr. King spoke, it just put fire in your bones. It's something about Dr. King that no man ever spoke like Dr. King. No man could motivate you like Dr. King could.
The Selma meetings and protests led to thousands of arrests, including Dr. King and Chuck Fager.
And the trustee brought one plate of greens for Dr. King, and nobody in the room, nobody would eat it. He and Abernathy always fasted first couple of days they were in jail, and I didn't know that, so I wasn't planning to. So I got to eat it.
While sitting in a Selma jail cell, Dr. King wrote a letter that was published in the New York Times that read, "This is Selma, Alabama. There are more Negroes in jail with me than there are on the voting rolls."
He knew that every day could be his last. And so he couldn't let up. And he always said, look, you're gonna die. Everybody's gonna die. And you don't have anything to say about when you die. You don't have anything to say about how you die. The only thing you can decide is what is it you give your life for.
When Lyndon Johnson was elected president in a November 1964 landslide, one of the people he called to thank was Martin Luther King.
How they justified their faith, and how many more now we've got to help get out of their bondage.
Yes, well, we are certainly all very happy about the outcome. It was just such a great victory.
And just 2 weeks after King's arrival in Selma, the two were on the phone again, with the president explaining his strategy for fast-tracking Medicare, education, and anti-poverty legislation, and his interest in voters' rights.
Now, if we can get that, and we can get a Medicare, we ought to get that by February. Then we get our poverty. That will be more than double what it was last year. Then we've got to come up with the qualifications of voters. That will answer 70% of your problems.
That's right.
If you can find the worst condition that you run into in Alabama, Mississippi, or Louisiana, or South Carolina, where, well, I think one of the worst I ever heard of is the president of the school at Tuskegee, or the head of the government department there, or something, being denied the right to cast a vote. And if you just take that one illustration and get it on radio and get it on television and get it on in the pulpits, get it in the meetings, get it every place you can, pretty soon the fellow that didn't do anything but drive a tractor, he'll say, well, that's not right, that's not fair.
But the voters' rights movement was about to take a turn that would be even more shocking and would push the president and Congress to act.
James was the one that Dr. King was seeing to go to these places and, I guess, case the place out, see what it's about, find churches where they can have mass meetings.
Marion Easley's older brother, James Orange, had been sent to Marion, a small town 30 miles north of Selma.
They say he had too much power, too much control over the young people. Then they say that the people that was with him were too young. So they put him in jail. He was arrested. It was an older guy that they let out of jail. He heard them say that they was gonna lynch him. To throw them off, they start marching that night. And the state troopers and the policemen shot the lights out in the city, in the little town. So that meant that they couldn't see.
Police attacked and beat the marchers. 24-year-old Jimmy Lee Jackson sought refuge with his mother and grandfather inside a cafe.
And we heard so much noise and what have you. That's when my friends and I, we all came down. And Jimmy had gotten shot, and numerous of people had been like beaten and what have you. And so we began trying to get people to the hospitals and what have you. Jimmy was first carried to the Perry County Hospital, but he was denied. And as a result, he was carried to Good Sand Hospital in Selma.
And so you're waiting to see, you know, how's he doing? So there's tension and suspense building there. And then he gets all infected inside, and suddenly he dies. And then you're mad.
A band of angels coming after me.
Today, a granite memorial on Jimmy Lee Jackson's grave has been scarred by bullets. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders led the funeral procession to this small cemetery outside Marion.
Only for to carry me home.
All of us were mad at Jimmy Lee Jackson being killed for nothing. I think on that march, the idea of going to Montgomery was born.
Without his death, the movement wouldn't have gotten very far off the ground.
And with that march to Montgomery came Bloody Sunday. A nation is shocked when Selma, a march to remember, continues.
We get to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers.
My heart was beating faster and faster because I knew something was gonna happen.
You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue.
When Jose Williams said to Major Cloud, give us a moment to kneel and pray. The major said, troopers advance. You saw this man and others putting on their gas masks. And Jose Williams said to me, John, they're going to gas us.
And then we were asked to turn around. And the leaders at the front of the line refused. And after they refused, racism unleashed its brutality upon us.
They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, pushing and shoving us, and then trampling us with horses. They released tear gas.
But I remember most of the screams. People were screaming and screaming, and people were just laying everywhere like they were dead, bleeding and not moving, and you couldn't stop to help them.
People had begun to be beaten down with billy clubs. Dogs and horses had begun to push their way into the crowd. Tear gas had begun to burst in the air. People had begun to try to run for their lives.
Once that tear gas hits you, you don't have any sense of direction.
I saw a horse just run over a lady. The man hit her, I don't know, but I could still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement.
Not only were my eyes hurting, my ears were hurting. And I saw grown men on horseback with billy clubs the size of baseball bats, coming down on the heads of women and children and splitting them like watermelons.
I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. My legs went from under me. I thought I was going to die.
And the late Reverend Hosea Williams picked me up, and my little feet were still galloping in his arms. And I looked at him, very frightened, devastated, and I said to him, put me down, because you are not running fast enough.
Some of us will run out of the line because Jim Clark and his deputies, after beating us, pursued us. And we had to go all the way back to Brown Chapel Church.
The people came back to the church, and they're hysterical. People are talking about going home, getting their guns, and so go up on the steps. I go up, and a couple of others were up on the steps of the church, and we were saying to people, please go into the church. Don't stand out here. There's troopers and possemen out there. They got guns. They're crazy. This is dangerous. No, don't go home and get your guns. That's just going to give them an excuse.
We had turned the house next to Brown Chapel into a clinic, and the people who were bleeding or who need stitches or had been seriously hurt were sort of laid out over there.
And I do recall being back at the church, and someone asked me to say something, and I stood up and said, I don't understand it, how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote.
Less than a week after protesters turned around at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, President Johnson addressed a joint session of Congress, formally proposing what would become the Voting Rights Act.
There is no moral issue. It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. And we shall overcome.
Just as I have a dream.
There's always been an organized attempt to turn the clock back.
The 1965 Voting Rights Act placed extra restrictions on Southern states. They had to get pre-approval from the U.S. Department of Justice for any changes in local voting rules or districts.
And there were 9 states that were totally covered, and an additional 7 states that were partially covered, and some 12,000 cities and counties.
In the city of Calera, Alabama, the 2010 census showed the population tripled during the previous decade. The city's only black councilman had his district redrawn.
Several communities was added to my district.
and it changed the district completely from a 70% African-American majority district down to about a 28-29% district.
Ernest Montgomery lost the next election, but the Justice Department voided the results, redrew the lines, and called for a new election.
We won our seat back, and here we are.
But that led to a pivotal court challenge from Shelby County.
Obviously, in 1965, the circumstances justified the Voting Rights Act. Now, I can't tell you whether that stopped in 20 years, or 40 years, or 50 years, but at some point along that continuum that brought us up to the time the court considered this in 2013, that was no longer relevant.
In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed and struck down the pre-clearance provision that affected thousands of Southern communities.
What the court said was that if you were going to impose different treatment on one sovereign state over another, you've got to show the exceptional circumstances. And you can't show the exceptional circumstances as they existed 50 years ago. You've got to show where it exists today.
Most people say, well, no, most people are going to do the right thing. We're going to be fair, do the best we can, make sure there's an inclusion with everyone. And I believe most people will. But on the other hand, there are those who just going to do just what they want to do.
And some states are also adding voter ID requirements.
It's just another attempt to roll back the clock to keep from as many people voting as would, and to discourage people from voting.
I'm not a happy camper about all this. I'm old, I'm tired. But then all of a sudden, bang, they had all these voter ID laws, and I just read those and I thought, this is too much, I can't put up with this. So I went down there and I had a little sign that said I got arrested with Dr. King for protesting racist voter suppression, and here we are again.
What we're dealing with now is economics, and it's unemployment, and we have not done the groundwork to deal with poverty that we had done to deal with political and social rights.
I walked with Dr. King 50 years ago.
So the Center of Hope really was a way of giving people some reason for being hopeful here in Selma.
For more than 3 decades, the Catholic Edmondite Mission in Selma has been feeding the poor.
For the most part, we are serving about 1,000 every single day. The water tower says, Selma, a nice place to live. It is a nice place to live. It would also be wonderful if it said, Selma, a nice place to work. Jobs are key. Education is key.
Those who marched at Selma have experienced the benefits of their bold actions a half-century ago. And perhaps, more than anyone, they believe their struggle has not ended.
I wouldn't be true to myself if I say we have not progressed. We've come a long, long way. We just had so far to go that we're still not there. I think what the communities have to realize that things that hurt me today hurt people who don't look like me, who are not of my hue. That poor people of any color in the rainbow are affected by bad laws.
It wasn't in vain because it did a lot for me. If I had not been a part of the margin, if I didn't learn discipline, if I did not learn how to turn these cheeks, I would not have been able to be a fire chief to go and break the racial barrier.
There's been a lot of bloodshed, lives lost, sacrifices made, and it was not the aim of the people who were involved in participating in these sacrificial acts, but it was for their children and their children's children. It was for coming generations.
I'll never forget the commitment that so many people had. Not only me, but others who had the commitment to make sure that they would change the things that had transpired in the past. And now they want to be a part of making sure that things would be better.
We've got to remember this stuff. We've got to pass it on. It's not like we can duplicate it. Dr. King's not coming back. The Selma movement's not coming back. But this is part of our heritage. You learn from it, and you figure out how to revive it and recreate it now.
We're much closer to redeeming the soul of America and creating a more perfect union.